I was an alcoholic for 27 years. Just about a year to the day after I stopped drinking, everything went south. Depression, anxiety. I had no idea what was happening. My brother turned around with a shovel and he nicked my cousin on the head, and there was a lot of blood. I remember leaving that therapy session and thinking, what do I do now? The more frequently that I have an experience, and maybe more dramatically that I have an experience, the more stronger my neural pathway is going to be for that experience. Memory consolidation is when you activate a memory, you bring it into the present, you've got about a 2-hour window to change it. That memory can be reconsolidated with a whole new neural thread, a whole new neural pathway. And when it gets put back into long-term memory, it's a different memory. That's not how emotional memories are formed. They're formed out of culture, context, and experience. And those lived experiences of people create neural pathways that create our emotions. The emotions are byproducts of our experiences. So emotions get created on the spot. If I have a traumatic experience, then a neural pathway is laid down. And the opposite is also true, that we can have positive memories that are built into our neurology. For a couple of years, I took NLP and hypnosis courses from Ron Klein. I tried it with my own clients, and I was blown away. So this works. It was about 2008 that I got serious about writing my own procedures and reworking what was a protocol that was never really written. Prediction errors happen when sensory information comes in that contradicts the neural pathway that I have about an experience. But something comes along and happens that contradicts that pathway, and the things that contradict the pathway are sensory information. Sensory input that is strong. Memory is sensory-based, and it's sensory-based at the neural level. And not only that, it's multi-sensory. It's multi-channel. We work auditory, visual, visceral, emotional, all the contexts. MEMI works so well is because it has the best prediction errors around. We introduce some of these prediction errors. They're very dynamic and odd and provocative and stuff like that. Then the old pathway is going to die out. Long-term depression just causes that to happen. Anything unusual coming in, it takes control and it shuts down our narrative thinking. Cognitive behavioral therapies are going to go out of fashion. If you're doing cognitive-based therapy and you're only arguing with irrational beliefs about a trauma, that's not sensory. So if I have a traumatic event and I'm recalling it the same way all the time, like we know happens, right? With the MEMI model, that is what is going to take us to the next level. I'm going to be 80 in a couple of months. So what are they going to do to me? No, but really, I just think it's important to bring it to the people who can use it. I've come to believe that I'm a catalyst for change. So maybe that's why I have so much energy around it.
Today's episode is a masterclass in the real-world power and application of neuro-linguistic programming. Dr. Mike Deninger, a licensed professional counselor, author, and the developer of multi-channel eye movement integration, or MEMI, was with me in my podcast. His life story is simply incredible. He's not only fifth of 6 kids from a working class family, and remarkably, all 6 siblings managed to overcome a hereditary family struggle with alcoholism. He also marched with Martin Luther King Jr. in Selma as a college freshman. Before he ever stepped foot in a role of therapist, Mike spent roughly 20 years as a highly successful university administrator and dean at Gallaudet University, where he led 2 congressionally funded national demonstration schools. Around the age of 45, shortly after achieving sobriety, he was hit with severe PTSD, which manifested as intense phobias of bridges, tunnels, heights, and agoraphobia in cars. During his own recovery, Mike treated himself as a living laboratory, earning his master's in counseling while undergoing intensive therapy. Crucially for us, in the NLP world, he amassed roughly 500 hours of training in NLP and Ericksonian hypnosis under Ron Klein in the DC area, and it was in 2002 where he first learned the original eye movement integration, an unabashedly NLP-based technique developed by Steve and Connie Ray Andreas. Mike eventually took the framework and expanded it using the NLP structure of experience model and created MEMI. Today, we're going to explore how he uses this rapid, sensory-based, bottom-up approach to completely bypass the long, painful process of traditional cognitive talk therapy. Let's dive right in. Welcome to a very special edition of the Pathways to Mastery. I have with me our very special guest, Dr. Mike Deninger. So over the last few decades, I would say, you've actually been involved in growing the MEMI community, and really after developing that modality, a lot of people have transformed their lives. How do you feel about that?
I feel pretty amazed, honestly. I didn't set out imagining that would happen. I did not, when I designed the protocol, I did not foresee that so many people would see it as so exquisite in terms of being application for a wide variety of problem states that people have.
Yeah, as a practitioner of neuro-linguistic programming myself, I've actually got a lot of questions. I know the two ladies have their own questions. It's going to be, let's call this a triple hypnotic induction, shall we? so you can actually allow yourself to soak in the fun, if possible. One of the things that I've come to realize is that it must have been quite a tremendous path to have to first be your living laboratory, go through the traumas that you've experienced, and then come up with this modality because of the engagement that you had with Rob Klein, if I'm not mistaken.
Ron Klein.
And eventually going back to looking at the original Andreas eye movement integration process.
Correct.
And you mentioned you did this way back in 2002.
I actually learned eye movement integration in 2002 from Ron Klein.
Yeah, wow, that's such a long time.
Yeah.
And through this process, you came up with MEMI. Would you give a story or an illustration of what the transformative effects were when you first tried it out and you realized that it was more elegant than other modalities?
Absolutely. So in my own trauma therapy, EMDR was used, cognitive behavioral therapy was used, Gestalt therapy was used, and none of them hit the mark. What really changed things for me in my own therapy was I had a person who was a hypnotherapist as well as a social work counselor. And hypnotherapy was brought me through. So the intricacy of my trauma recovery had to do with a lot of dreams that I had, and the dreams foretold what was to come.
Oh.
Yeah, it was very interesting. And I recorded all the dreams, luckily. So I stopped drinking. I was an alcoholic for 27 years. From the time I was 18, I started drinking, not realizing that anything was that unusual. But in retrospect, of course, now it's a clear picture for me. But when I finally made the decision to stop drinking, I was on that pink cloud that people talk about. I wasn't sleeping at all, but I felt so good. 1 year, just about a year to the day after I stopped drinking, everything went south. Depression, anxiety. I had no idea what was happening. And I was thinking about this earlier today in anticipation of these questions, and thinking that was the worst part of my life, because I described it as being a zombie walking from bed to bed at night because sleep was not a possibility. And because I was in recovery, I'm not going to take benzodiazepines or anything like that. I did get maybe a short prescription one time that helped me sleep, and I, of course, went back for more, being an addict. And the doctor said, no, it's not going to work. So it was like, all right, back to sleepless nights and a lot of anxiety. So that part was really left an impression on me, because with the dreams unfolding and then being in therapy and doing hypnotherapy almost once a week for about a year, probably.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. There were a couple of times when I was on the couch laying down and my arms were gripping the sides and my back was rising up off the couch, and I would just scream out as a memory just came clear into focus. Attached to many things that I knew all my life, but the particular moment when I was defiled, let's say. After that, And coming through recovery with that person, I did everything. I had massage therapy. I had a reaction when somebody was doing Reiki on me, on my back. And of course, the massage therapist who was skilled at doing that kind of work explained that body memories can be stored down in that location. So coming out the other end, it just so happened that I was changing careers. Long story there, which I won't go into, but I got myself into a little trouble at the university where I was working because I've worked with deaf and hard of hearing people all my life.
Yes.
And at the time, there was a transition going on in that field from speaking and signing at the same time to just signing. And that means you don't use your voice. I was one of the first hearing people not to use their voice at the university where I was working. And that set me up for a big problem because hearing people were expected to sign and to use their voice at the same time. Okay. The president called me in. He said, I don't know if I'm going to fire you or give you a strong letter of warning. And that was really my cue to, okay, I'm in recovery. I don't want to stay in this job anymore. I was a dean at a university. I don't want to do this anymore. I eventually got transferred to a graduate school where I could do research and teach graduate students. That allowed me the bandwidth then to change my life some so that it become more compatible with recovery. And that was when I started a counseling degree in the graduate school. My original field is special ed administration, and that's what my doctorate is in. So that's when I was the living laboratory, I described myself, because I was going through trauma treatment, and one day I might be crying on the bleachers at the university, and the next day I'd be in class and we're talking about trauma and what happens and all of that. But through it all, I finally got diagnosed with PTSD and was put on, I think it was probably Prozac. That's those years, that's
back in those days,
what they gave. And that did help, but sleep was always elusive. Sleep was elusive because I had dreams that involved my perpetrator, and they were very symbolic, but I don't know what you believe about dreams, but I've come to believe that they really are internal readouts of what's going on with us. Sometimes they're metaphorical, but sometimes they can get pretty close to reality. I'll tell you one. For many years, I had this memory that just kept coming up and coming up all my life. And it was a day when it was a hot summer day, and my dad had a trailer bed that we drove across town to get coal because we were a middle-class family, and that's how we heated the house. So we had the coal on the trailer, came back home, and we were young. Maybe I was 10 or maybe even a little younger. My two male cousins and my older brother, and our shirts were off and we were being men. We were shoveling coal through the coal chute in the basement. And my brother turned around with a shovel and he nicked my cousin in the head. And there was a lot of blood because of where the nick was. That was the memory. And it kept coming up and coming up. And when I was in the middle of beginning to recall everything, put things in place, of course, it's not perfect. Things come in when they come in. I recall the memory of what happened to me in the coal bin. And you see it from the side, or I saw it from the side and up above, and I was looking at this stop action going on in the coal bin. And that was when I was gripping the couch. Holy shit. I remember leaving that therapy session and thinking, what do I do now? This is like a whole part of your history is rewritten here, and there's no doubt about it, but I kept going back to my therapist and saying, maybe this isn't true. What's the chance that it's not true? And he said, 0%. And that was the biggest event. And then there were all kinds of other events that related to it. So when I came out the other end, I had always done a lot of group work when I was a dean. So I'd always have working groups going on, and I like to get in there and mess with the groups and give them guidance and cheer them on and stuff like that. So it was a natural fit for me to then move into counseling. And once I was ready to get my degree, the university was downsizing, and I was going to be 50, and that was the year when you could retire early. And so I got a buyout. I got full pension.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was a new lease on life. It was like, oh, this is great. So that's when I started up a private practice. That was like 1999, and then it was, for a couple of years, I took NLP and hypnosis courses from Ron Klein.
Nice.
In 2002, I saw the first demonstration of EMI. And I was like everybody, this can't be true. But I went home, and at that time, it was just a one day of instruction. There was really no manual, anything like that, just some copies of drawings and stuff. And I tried it with my own clients, and I was blown away. Wow. Okay, so this works. So over the next several years, until about 2008, I was using it pretty consistently, and it was working, and then I started teaching it to other people. The only problem was there was no documentation for EMI. So that was what set me on the journey, and it was about 2008 that I got serious about writing my own procedures and reworking what was a protocol that was never really written, and borrowing. By that time I was an NLP trainer. I had certifications, Ericksonian hypnotherapy trainer, and used my knowledge of NLP to beef it up. But I had no idea at that time that this is what it would eventually become.
Fascinating.
Yeah,
because around about that time, I did my trainer certification with Bandler in 97. And somewhere during that time, I also encountered Robert Dilts, whom you quote with eye movement research and so on. And it dawned on me that an internal strategy that Robert's very well known for, the totes and his score models and so on, tie in very nicely with eye movements. And I did try a couple of these just experimentally myself, because Richard always says, go out and be curious. So I was. Right. And after hearing what the two ladies were raving about with MEMI, I got even more curious, curiouser and curiouser. And it became pretty evident that the core model of NLP can serve many functions. It's just that many people have not, unlike yourself, really gone down the rabbit hole and just testing. And I think that's fascinating. It's an entire new universe. It's almost as if you peeled away the layer, and people now have so much more access to care they couldn't have gotten anywhere else. You say doing a year of hypnotherapy, that's, to many people, is a luxury that they probably couldn't afford, whether it's money or time.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about your experience of diving into that rabbit hole. I know you did quite a fair bit of research. You also do a little bit of comparison between EMDR and the original EMI. Tell us a little bit about how that unfolded. Did you ever get to meet Steve Andreas?
Yes, I did. Yeah, actually, when I was composing the book, I got in contact with them because I wanted to use them as a reference, obviously, and I actually got signed permission from them to use their materials. But I got a lot more than that from them, because what I got from them was the actual history of what happened in those early days. And actually, I think I was probably the first person to write some of the information that is now becoming much more clear out there. Because Francine Shapiro worked in John Grinder's office, right? When she was probably, before she probably entered her doctoral program, she was sold on NLP, because there's a couple of articles by Gerald Rosen, and one of them just came out like the week before I came here. The first one was a couple of years ago, and I talked with Rosen about, he had a beef with Shapiro, because it's interesting, because he's a clinical psychologist, a retired professor now, and he didn't believe in eye movement therapies at all. I don't know what his orientation was, but I talked to him thinking we might have something in common, because when he wrote this article, it was a detailed historical piece about what Francine Shapiro was doing after she left. She was working with Grinder and after, and all these businesses that she set up, and they were all NLP. So she was, and you read the article, she had this company and that company, and she was incorporated here and there, but it was all new age type of trainings with NLP as a focus.
Right.
So everybody in the NLP community knew that, right? So in 87 was when she said she had to walk in the park, and the story is suddenly she had a distressing thought and her eyes went in saccadic motions, right? To my understanding, that's not possible, right? When you have a disturbing thought, yes, your eyes move in a particular direction. I don't think it's the same direction for everyone, right? Mm-hmm. I believe that eye movements are organized and systematic for each person. And then she said that after they went in this automatic fashion, she realized that the thought was not as distressing. And that makes no scientific sense, because what she was doing was an automatic eye movement. Yeah. She wasn't planning to move her eyes in order to distress the idea. She was just accessing the visual image, or whatever image she was accessing, feeling. So from the beginning, that made no sense. She was confronted by 2 or 3 NLP people about that, because she wrote her first article in 89. And honestly, if you look at the first article in 89, it was in the Journal of Traumatic Stress, you'll see that it was very simple. And it was much like EMI, okay? EMI came out right after that, because the Andreases had students of theirs, NLP students of theirs, who were, let's say they were spying on what Francine Shapiro was doing over in California, and they would go to her training, and then they would call up the Andreases, and they would say, this is what she's doing. And so the Andreases were like, that's NLP. Or from the beginning, Francine said it had nothing to do with NLP. So once that came to be, and she wrote the 89 article, then that same year, Steve and Connie Ray developed eye movement integration. And the only thing that they really stole from her was eye movements. Mm-hmm. Having someone follow with their eyes a movement that you are creating. And to me, that was her genius, coming up with that idea. But the divided consciousness, where you're projecting an image, that was done in NLP long before that. In NLP trainings in the early 80s, I think it was Robert Dilts probably, would to show the importance of eye movements in recall, and visual recall especially, would have people think of a distressing memory and locate it, right, wherever it's comfortable for you to get that memory, and then move that memory with your eyes to another location and see if there's any difference. Mm-hmm. And the understanding is, if you do this, and I do it when I train people sometimes, when you move it from the location that is most accessible, let's say in NLP terms, down here, it's different. I can't quite get the same clarity when it's up here.
Yeah.
That was done in the early 80s. Francine Shapiro knew about that. So what she added was this and the divided consciousness, and that was what she called the eye movement desensitization procedure. Now what ensues is NLP and the Andreases come out with eye movement integration. Mm. People started writing nasty things to Francine, that you stole NLP stuff, and she's saying, I didn't do that. Steve Andreas actually had lunch with her at an NLP conference in New York, and maybe it was 85, I think. No, it was later than that, because she already came out with it. And he said, you're doing NLP? And she said, no, I'm not. This is personal communication from Steve to me. And she asked the Andreases to stop. She sent them a letter, cease and desist, because they were infringing on her eye movement model. And they said no. And that ended there. My mentor, Ron Klein, picked up on EMI right after he learned it. And he got the same poison pen letter from Shapiro's attorney. Oh. And he had his attorney write back, and then it died there, probably because it wasn't defensible. Yeah. So after all of that, and I learned in 2002, in 2008, it was like, okay, what could I do with this? And this is where the creative part comes in. I started to think about the eye movements and the model. And my view of the model is that it is imperfect, for sure. I don't think anybody really believes that this is the way it works for everybody. But there was one study in 1987. So think about this. Yeah, it was the same year that Shapiro came up with her discovery. I can't remember the guy's last name. First name is Michael now. But he did a doctoral dissertation where he tested the eye movement model with live subjects, and the accessing positions for the visual at the top and the auditory came out as valid at p equals 0.001 level.
Wow.
So it's a definite validation of those four areas. They didn't test the internal dialogue, and they could not validate the feelings level access position. So nothing ever happened after that. So when I'm trying to figure out what to do with the eye movements, I made a decision to tailor my eye movements to the eye movement model, even though I knew that at least those two accessing positions might not be accurate. But I decided to use the as-if frame, right? I'm going to go along as if they are true. And the weird thing is that I think people are finding out that it is happening, right? So when you go down to the feelings level location, it does change the feeling level status when you test for the intensity of it, and internal dialogue as well. So that's how I decided to craft what I did. The triangles came, I can't really recall which one came first. It was just like, oh yeah, I'll try this, I'll try that. But when we came out with what the eye movement model is now and the eye movements themselves, the real creative part came with when I was doing the figure eight. I started thinking about, okay, this is visualization here, right? So what if we come up with some prompts, some verbal prompts, some liminal prompts, right, that might match them? So it was like that experience and everything related to it in the distant background. But in the distant past, okay? So that is a prompt for people to think about. It's in the past, it's back there. But the pause there is meant to trigger that thought for people. So that was the creative part for me when I was doing that. And the shrinking circles was my design. And there was an ellipsis in eye movement integration. I don't think they used the figure eight, but it was just a straight up ellipsis. And the shrinking circles was designed as a visual and a linguistic and some other kind of metaphor, right? So if you shrink the circles, you can actually shrink the symptoms as well. And it starts with now a big circle encompassing everything. And that's a setup for saying, okay, we've got all of these negative reactions that you have in the circle. It's contained, and we can reverse it, and it's going to shrink down smaller and smaller and smaller. That's one of the things that I enjoyed doing and coming out with. So yeah, that was the creative part. And then the rest of it was trying to figure out how to put the protocol in an order that made sense. Using the test-retest model. Shapiro was already doing that. She never referenced where she got it. It wasn't original in NLP anyway. It was around since the 50s. And it was something that a lot of people were doing, but NLP really featured it. Coming down with the protocol. The other thing that happened late in the game, because this is not even in the book that I wrote, was the intensity score. I do take credit for that because it was my original invention, and it also connects the levels of change. Because I think one of the benefits, one of the real neat things about MEMI is that you work with submodalities at a granular level. It's right down there in terms of human experience, people's recall, and their ability to judge what's happening with them. So when you scale it and you give it a 0 to 4, it becomes very precise in terms of what they're experiencing. And not only that, but it mirrors the SUD which is the 0 to 100. Not only that, but then when I selected the PCL5 as the assessment instrument for it, it's the same model, 0 to 4. So things all worked out in the end, and not always because of a design, but because some things happen just the way they should, and other things happen because, oh, look at that. They come together.
Very nice. I can see quite a number of parallels between the way you're utilizing visual metaphor as well as analog marking in order to incorporate linguistics into the mind of the client in order to shift them in the direction that they need to for that emotional state to dissipate. Very fascinating. And we were just surmising over lunch, why a figure 8, why concentric circles, why not the letter A or W, or just a playful question, but did you ever experiment with other kinds of directional movements?
I can't say that I did. I think one of the things that drove me was to keep it simple.
Right.
Yeah. You make it too complicated, and I'm all about, I was telling the group earlier this, I want this to be a program or a procedure for the masses. One of the things that I rail against is what I call the mental health industrial complex. It's alive and well all over the world. And you can pick one of those supposedly evidence-based therapies. What's behind them? In the US, we have PESI, which is a commercial mental health operation. And what do they put forward? Only the evidence-based stuff. Where does the evidence-based stuff come? It comes from associations, it comes from money. It comes from universities that get federal grants, and they develop, it's not that they develop these therapies, they've been around. They promote them, they advertise them, they market them. And it's a message that people buy into, but the research says, as far as the evidence-based models for trauma go, they're no more effective than non-trauma therapy, talk therapy. There's a study by Steenkamp. It was 2015. It was done at NYU, Langone Medical Center. And they looked at prolonged exposure and cognitive processing therapy, which are two of the therapies that the VA in the US says are the gold standard. These were women who were sexual assault victims in the military. And it was a meta-study. So they looked at 9 randomized controlled trials altogether. 5 were of cognitive processing therapy and 4 of prolonged exposure. And after that study was done, the results were very disappointing. And in their results, they said that there doesn't seem to be only a marginal kind of difference between these evidence-based studies and non-trauma therapies. But still, we keep calling them evidence-based. And in my book, I argue that they shouldn't be called that.
Yeah, it's stretching the word evidence to a new level, right? And it reminds me that a lot of these therapies, I remember seeing an ad on Facebook saying that even procrastination is caused by trauma. And nowadays it seems like everything is caused by trauma. Every problem that we have is caused by trauma. To a certain extent, I guess I do believe that, but I'm pretty sure that there are other mechanisms. One of the things that you mentioned in the recent, very successful 2-day MEMI conference is the idea of memory consolidation. Would you speak a little bit about that?
Sure. So I've become very aware very recently, right? I always was aware about memory consolidation, but one of our trainers led me to investigate a couple of other things that are very cutting edge. Prediction error. And let's talk about Lisa Feldman Barrett. She wrote a 2017 book. And her argument in the book, and it's well-sourced and well-defended, is that the classical view of how emotional memories are formed is that they're hardwired at birth. So theoretically, we would have a gene or a network for anger, one for pride, one for something else. But there's no science to back that up at all. So she argues that's not how emotional memories are formed. They're formed out of, and she does say, it involves culture, context, and experience. And those lived experiences of people create neural pathways that create our emotions. The emotions are byproducts of our experiences. So emotions get created on the spot. So if I have a traumatic experience, then a neural pathway is laid down, and we call that a threat-bearing pathway. And so when I recall that every time, that same pathway is run through. And the opposite is also true, that we can have positive memories that are built into our neurology, like somebody who's a musician is going to have very excellent auditory neural pathways, much different from other people. And there are a couple of processes involved in how these pathways get formed. One is called long-term potentiation, and one is called long-term depression. So the idea is the more frequently that I have an experience, and maybe more dramatically that I have an experience, the more strong or stronger my neural pathway is going to be for that experience. So when we're looking at memory consolidation, that's like at the top of the food chain, okay? That's what happens last. But at the synapse level, these neural pathways get formed. If I have a traumatic experience and I have a neural pathway that represents that, if there's nothing that interferes or corrects that in terms of my experience, I keep recalling it that way. This is where prediction errors come in. Prediction errors happen when sensory information comes in that contradicts the neural pathway that I have about an experience. So if I have a traumatic event and I'm recalling it the same way all the time, like we know happens, right? But something comes along and happens that contradicts that pathway. And the things that contradict the pathway are sensory information. Sensory input that is strong, novel, safe, and this is really important, safe, and repeated. And this is the lead to MEMI, okay? Because MEMI is sensory-based, right? And it's sensory-based at the neural level. And not only that, it's multisensory. It's multi-channel. We work auditory, visual, visceral, emotional, all the contexts. And so my argument, and this is what I presented in my keynote address the other day, is that the reason why I think MEMI works so well is because it has the best prediction errors around. If you're doing cognitive-based therapy and you're only arguing with or trying to identify irrational beliefs about a trauma, number one, that's not sensory, it's cognitive. And it's going to be like coming through the back door. Sensory level is direct. If we have prediction errors that are, one, let's have you project an image of that experience back there. That's a contradiction, right? Because people visualize like this. So it's, you're not in it, it's back there, we say, okay? We have an anchoring a resource. So we're making them safe in competition with the trauma pathway, okay? So there's another contradiction. And the numbers are like 10 or 12 that we offer as pattern interruptions are the same as prediction errors, okay? And that's how that all fits together. The neuroscience says that this is how we learn because prediction errors are the engine of learning, no matter what it is. A new skill, a change in environment, a workout routine, all build pathways.
Yeah, reminds me of the Zeigarnik effect.
Yeah,
right?
Zeigarnik effect, yeah.
Interesting that you mentioned that. It's very, I think it's a very interesting perspective on what already currently exists, because when working on the natural tendencies, most people don't take a look at what already works. I encountered people with trauma because that moment was very intense, but they don't have a trauma of something else that wasn't as intense. So if we did it with positive memories, like we could create positive and very powerful resource states. Now, Richard has always been encouraging us in the good old days. And even right now, he says, you got to learn how to feel good for no good reason. And I think a lot of people have forgotten how to take volitionally our capabilities of building those resources. Right now, my main focus is taking NLP and applying it into the business community. We know that there's a lot of burnout, a lot of people who do emotional numbing, dissociation when they're trying to run their business because the revenue matters more than their well-being. And I think there's some research that shows that about 70% of business owners have burnt out since the end of 2025. And I think that's probably also where MEMI can come into the picture in discussions with both John and Michelle to hopefully be able to bring some of that to places outside of just trauma work. Memory consolidation, therefore, to me, sounds like it's going to help people to move away from just thinking about trauma, right? Because you can then consolidate other kinds of memories, or you can desensitize, if I could use that phrase broadly, memories that you don't need anymore, or you choose not to need to access anymore.
Yeah, I didn't actually describe memory reconsolidation, so if I can retrace here. So change also takes place at the structural level. So the synapses and the neurons themselves, those synapses can die, and that's from lack of use. So if we introduce some of these prediction errors, they're very dynamic and odd and provocative and stuff like that, then the old pathway is going to die out.
Yes.
Long-term depression just causes that to happen. Then this new one replaces it.
Yes, correct.
And then at the structural level, dendrites grow, new synapses grow, and the neurons recruit other networks and bring them in to help them build this new pathway. And then you go up a level and we've got brain networks. So the salience network is one that is like the watchdog.
Yes.
Anything unusual coming in, it takes control and it shuts down our narrative thinking and it shuts down our ability to do executive control, those two other networks. But when you do prediction errors in a novel and safe and unusual way, that information moves up the food chain. So it goes from synapse to structural remodeling to network changing, and that informs memory consolidation. Memory consolidation is when you activate a memory, you bring it into the present, you've got about a 2-hour window to change it. Why? How? Prediction errors. So when you're doing these prediction errors and things are changing up the food chain, then that memory can be reconsolidated with a whole new neural thread, a whole new neural pathway. And when it gets put back into long-term memory, it's a different memory.
Yeah, the long-term potentiation is something that I remember being very fascinated about when I did my psychology undergrad studies. And I realized that even other techniques that help to form habits require long-term potentiation. That's definitely something. If we've always been remembering bad memories about something, like being unable to speak in public, for example, and feeling nervous on stage, for example, and we shift the neurology around that and we keep rehearsing the correct neurology rather than the anxious neurology, then obviously a new memory comes up. So much application just right there in terms of how to run a business, how to pick oneself out from failure, how to deal with better communication in a relationship and so on. What we're really saying and what you're really saying is we can form better potential, literally, just simply by going through this process of memory consolidation. It's
exactly
brilliant. Yeah. Do either of you have further questions?
I want to share like a personal story. And in the conference, Dr. Mike was mentioning that all these synaptic pathways is like a path through a forest. Reminded me of a summer abroad program I had in Berlin, where they had all these like very monumental pathways that was built by the government. And the local people are like, we are not stepping on these pathways. We are just going to walk on the grass. And these became like memory paths. Because basically like the more people use these paths, the grass, they don't grow back. So it creates these traces of like pathways literally forming around the city as a sign of rebellion. And I thought that was so interesting because everything that is being created, it has to be actively reinforced. And this means that every action that we make has an active choice, right? So we choose to reinforce it, the pathways become stronger. If we choose to create new pathways, at every moment we can make new choices. I think that is so wonderful for clients to hear, to know that it's possible at every moment to create these new pathways and new possibilities. And I think it gives them a lot of hope that this happens on a structural and biological level.
Yeah, exactly. That's long-term potentiation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think what you mentioned earlier on about making MEMI simple, in any case, anyone who's traumatized or experiencing any kind of negative emotion, they already have so much cognitive load. what more having talk therapy that requires them to rehash things again. Actually, there's long-term potentiation for the memory that you don't need, right? So you're rehearsing the wrong stuff. Michelle?
Yeah, off the back of the conference, there were a number of questions that came up for me, and I think they all revolve around how, because the theme for the conference is beyond trauma. So it really opened my eyes to non-clinical applications. And I wonder for you, Dr. Mike, if you see MEMI as trauma removing or for the longer term resilience building. And the follow-up question to that is, where in your ideal world, who would practice MEMI other than clinicians?
Well, that's a great question. MEMI is really designed to address all stuck states in my mind, right? So yeah, it's trauma removal, and it was designed as a PTSD therapy, right? However, I've always maintained that it's applicable to a number of other problem states. And you saw it at the conference. They're addressing all kinds of different problems. As long as you can identify a specific problem state, then you can address it with eye movements and things like that. Now, when it comes to long-term resilience, people are always going to stumble, right? Especially somebody who, let's just say somebody had a single event trauma, like a bicycle accident where they ran into a car or something like that. They may recover from that accident and they may be trauma-free from that, but then they get divorced, or then they have a conflict at work, or then they have, so in the resilience pathway, there's always going to be a need for an eye movement therapy like MEMI.
And I asked that question because in dual train as a psychotherapist and a coach, I've had a number of referrals from coaches as well, because they had this relationship with a client and then something comes up and sometimes they freak out and they pass it over, like, can you work with this client? And hence, from that perspective, their journey with the client might stop. But for me, I see it also like a wasted opportunity, because there's been so much rapport that's been built up with that client.
Yeah.
And are we being fearful, too fearful, or are coaches not being equipped with safe, replicable protocols that can help them to move the progress of the client? And I see those.
Yeah. Just off the top of my head, I remember coaching class teaching that coaches are masters of the process, right? Role model, whatever model it is, and just follow that process naively and you'll be able to get some kind of result until they hit a snag like that.
Yeah.
Right? Oh, a traumatic episode comes up and they don't know how to handle it, or someone is very emotional. And if you try to use the GROW model on a trauma episode, it's just not going to work.
Yeah.
So
you'll be glad to know that we have a certification program for NLP practitioners, hypnotherapists, and coaches. And that's, I mentioned earlier, I want it to be for the masses. My obvious decisions that I made to bring it to people, because it is a model that you can use in those settings. Obviously, there are going to be people in the clinical area who are going to look at that and say, we are the clinicians. We do that stuff. But I'm going to be 80 in a couple of months. So what are they going to do to me? No, but really, I just think it's important to bring it to the people who can use it.
Yeah.
And first responders. Yeah, the program we have for them.
It's fascinating to have all of these different areas, because now where help wasn't immediately available, I know lots of counselors who are just packed back to back, and there's no way for them to even take on more clients in the first place. So by democratizing it, I would say, it becomes a lot easier for access. Where would be the best place for anyone who's listening to this podcast? Where can they get information about that?
They can go to multi-channel eyemovementintegration.com, and all of the training programs and certification programs are there. For first responders, we have a trainer in Texas who is leading that program, and we've developed a special 5-day program. The clinical program is 2 days and then 10 hours of consultation. The first responder program, where we're teaching the protocol to people who are employed as policemen, firemen, but who have had special training in mental health to work in peer support groups. They already have the ability to give support to people, but they didn't have a tool to really help them. And these people, like Brian said in his presentation, they won't go to therapy. That's just a part of the culture. Brian has been about a year at that now, and we're doing a outcomes study of the use of MEMI with first responders in peer support programs with the help of a faculty member at Stephen F. Austin University in Texas. So by the end of the year, we should be able to begin reporting some outcomes data from that study.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the corporate world has been taking on a lot of first responders training, at least in this region, as far as both Michelle and I are concerned. We've seen that after approaching a lot of corporations. While that's still helpful, they aren't tooled. They can sit down and hold the space and stuff like that, active listening, those kinds of skill sets.
Yeah.
But the tools are missing, and I think that's a great opportunity for MEMI. So I thought you had another question about relationship building, was it?
Relationship building. Actually, I think even before that, I wanted to also share something, because as a couple therapist and trauma therapist myself, I've seen that the biggest transformation actually comes from prediction error. So like time does not heal all wounds. And I think we know that because they still have trauma after like years and years or even decades, the trauma remains. If time heals all wounds, it should have healed by now. So I think what I've consistently seen with my clients is in therapy, after they do the eye movements, for example, when the sensory experiences are actually dampened, they can look at each other and be like, okay, so I can finally get where you're coming from. And it's so incredible because we don't need to talk about the story in painful detail. We can just desensitize the experiences, and that already creates the bridge for people to come together. And through the love of the relationship, I think that creates this amazing prediction error because they're just expecting the threat to happen in the body. It doesn't happen. Two people can look at each other in the present instead of each other as a problem. And I think that's something really special that many can do.
Yeah, what we know is that, it's not just the trauma label is understood, I think, in our vernacular, in the US anyway, as really big. It's not really trauma. But if you have a betrayal like that or something like that, and the two people in the couple want to engage and they want to get over it, the person who's been betrayed still has the embodied sensations, right? And that's what you're talking about, being able to desensitize so that they have more resources then. They're more resilient then. They're more able to come to the table with a clean slate because they don't have this interference.
Yeah, it just dawned on me because one of the, now that you've mentioned the topic of things like betrayal, it happens in businesses all the time.
Sure.
And unfortunately, there's this mindset of I'll just soldier on and I'll just hustle through whatever difficulties there are. I've tried it before. Being a bona fide entrepreneur, I've encountered my own betrayals before. And yeah, it doesn't feel good. The visceral sensation, the heartbreaking almost, right? And just trying to walk through that is a facade. It doesn't work at all. And I've realized that for me, being able to reframe and tell things from a different perspective through the years helped me. But gosh, I wish I had MEMI back then without having to re-narrate in different ways. Yeah. Do you feel that the frontier of MEMI is there a new frontier of development? Any interesting growth areas for the future that you see?
Definitely. First of all, I have to complete the second edition of my book. And it has to include what I gave as the keynote presentation this week.
Yes.
Because once I understood what prediction error was and all of that, and saw that it fit so with the MEMI model, that is what is going to take us to the next level. Because my prediction is that the cognitive behavioral therapies are going to go out of fashion. And it's just a question of how soon. Because with all the information we're getting about neuroscience now, with AI research, it's coming in like crazy. I get it every day. I get a new study about this and that and this and that. But with the umbrella of prediction error and reconsolidation, we're able to put a framework around it. Okay, so this is the model, not just for trauma, but for any maladaptive kind of behavior that somebody has as a result of neurology. And talking about it is not going to get us there. The talk therapies now require 12 to 15 sessions.
Yeah.
And effectively what that means at the end is they will be a little bit better than they were, statistically significant, because we've got a whole lot of people stuffed into this sample, and that means that your power in the sample is greater and you can show that much of growth to be statistically significant. But in lived experience, it's not. So it's going to change, it's going to come. It's just a question of how soon, I think.
With that, how might you treat a client if he or she comes in saying, I want talk therapy? I just want to help the audience visualize the journey of the session with MEMI, because they might come with some skepticism, fear, doubt.
So you want to establish rapport, right?
Yeah.
And if you tell them I do it this way, then you've lost rapport. So you walk with them for a while and you listen to their stories. And if they start repeating, you say, yeah, you told me that before. Have you ever thought of a different way of addressing that? Sometimes old counselors used to have a saying, spit in the soup, which essentially means say something that's really going to tell them this is hogwash, right? So we don't want to do that. But at some point, there is let's come to the moment. And sometimes it's an honest conversation. If you really want to change, then repeating these stories over and over again is not going to get you where you want to go. So where do you really want to go? What do you want the outcome to be?
Yes.
And then let's construct that together. And then you can think about MEMI or some somatic techniques or something like that.
And this part on the agreement to change is actually a very pivotal component.
I can't emphasize how important that is.
Yeah.
Because you run across it all the time. People can say in the beginning that they definitely want it, and they're authentic. I don't want these reactions. We don't say we want to change the trauma. We want to change your reaction. However, later on, with something we call secondary benefit,
Secondary gain?
a person is holding on to it because say they lost their husband to suicide or something. If I let go of these reactions, then do I have to let go of him too? His memory? Is that going to happen? Secondary benefit. So in those cases, you have to do this is the one time when we use cognitive restructuring. Generally, we don't. But if someone has difficulty agreeing to the change, then we use cognitive restructuring to help them get to the point. And in the training video that I developed, that I use, the woman came to that point where she said, but if I'm being selfish, she said first, I'm being selfish. And so you ask questions like, what would he want for you? And she gets pissed off. He would want me to do this. He would want me to do that. Okay. How do you feel about that? Do you think he's right? Yeah, maybe, but I still don't want to let go of it. Okay, let's talk about it a little more. Or we move on and we do some more MEMI and then it comes up again. Until you get to the point where she says, I remember the tone in her voice. She said, yeah, I could give it up, maybe. And I said, is that what your husband would want for you? And she said, yeah, the devil. And then it happened.
But it really is, I guess, a lot of, whether it's habits, good or bad, memories, holding on to it is sometimes comforting, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
We tend to gravitate towards familiarity and we hang on to it for heaven knows what, but it's the devil rather than the devil you don't. So
I worked with a mother one time who had lost her son to a heart attack. He was 9 years old, and nobody knew he had a heart condition. So it came as a complete shock. Actually, I worked with the father first, and he had a drinking problem as a result. So I helped him with MEMI and come to grips with it. He had trauma of his own. I did not see the mother until 5 years later. She came in, finally she came in, but she still couldn't make that agreement to change until I asked her, do you think your son would want you to suffer? And she said, no, I don't think so. And then we were able to go ahead with it. So sometimes it's a long time for people to come to that.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
I think your own story of walking through trauma and to be able to see that your entire family was going through difficulties and all siblings went through and came out on top, came out victorious, if I could use that metaphor of some kind of a personal victory. I think it tells people that, one, families who undergo difficulties actually can heal. And that's a possibility. And if anything else, to lean into that possibility because it's hopeful. And because of your lived experience, I think it makes it even more hopeful now that MEMI is starting to gain a lot more traction and getting a lot more practitioners. I feel that this is really just the beginning of unveiling the whole story of what MEMI can do. So I'm really grateful and honored to have the opportunity to speak with you at length like this, diving into a little bit of NLP and realizing that, maybe the kinds of integration that we do in our work does have a much deeper purpose. And that's something that we need to live into so that the clients that we meet, the people who are in need, actually feel this kind of liberation. Really appreciate the opportunity and time.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Are there any further questions from the both of you?
I think I just want to point out, MEMI really emphasizes the human relationship. Yeah. Because a lot of people think that relationships in therapy or even in coaching is purely emotional. But there's so much of human connection that is non-verbal and on a sensory level. And I think MEMI does that beautifully. Whether it's the pace of a client, using their personal vocabulary, there is so much sensitivity to MEMI that I think makes it so relational and so powerful. And we all know that the human relationship is the biggest predictive factor of therapeutic and perhaps even coaching success, that there needs to be a foundation of relationship. I think at the conference, Dr. Mike has done that beautifully, and we saw the transformation in only a few sets. I think Michelle was there as well and she saw it.
Yeah, I think for me, I think therapy is the last to my other things that I do. I learned MEMI as part of the toolkit very early on in the journey. Also integrated some of the stuff that I know about NLP. And previously, I really struggled with mindfulness-based intervention because first and foremost, I'm a mindfulness-based practitioner. I've been doing it for 6-7 years. And I had so many questions around it, around being trauma-informed. And there didn't seem to be a lot of literature back then. And when I started to deepen my understanding about trauma and learning a couple of other modalities at MEMI, I realized that they all integrate very beautifully, and it's exciting to see what this toolkit can do for clients, and that the opportunities for MEMI as a new frontier is, we're just at the sort of the start of it. And very exciting times.
Yeah, we are at the start. The only other thing that I would add is that I've come to believe that I'm a catalyst for change. And once I identified that, and this was after recovery, once I identified that, then it was very easy to figure out what to do with my life. And it feels like everything's aligned right now. So with the time I have, that this makes sense. And maybe that's why I have so much energy around it.
I just have one, just something came up when
go ahead.
Dr. Mike, you were sharing. I know there's been debate about lived experience and non-disclosure in the therapy world. And my personal opinion as a eating disorder survivor is that there's so much richness in the experience and automatically builds rapport with my clients. And I don't know what your experience has been as well, being so open about your own journey recovery. Yeah.
I come down on that side, definitely. I definitely share more of my own personal story with people that I work with. You have to be careful about that, right? You don't want to infringe on their integrity by doing that. But if it matches, then it is a way of making a friend and being able to walk together on the path. I also came out as a gay man when I was like 42 or something like that. So I have that experience, having lived a different person all that time and trying to make myself over into somebody else.
Right.
And so when I came out, I learned that it was really beneficial for me, for other people like myself, to tell my story, but not to overwhelm them with it. And I feel the same way about my experience with trauma.
I don't think it's just your energy, Dr. Mike, it's your memory. Yeah, maybe you've been doing MEMI for such a long time, you've been forming up a lot of new patterns and everything's consolidated. Maybe you are the living proof, and that for anything else at your current age, your level of fitness, mind, body, I think it's admirable. It really
We
is.
were just joking, I think, over lunch, and you were just sharing the fact that Einstein's brain is 25% heavier
Than the
something
average
like
person,
that,
yeah.
than the average person. And I think both of us got really curious. You mean?
It's like that much.
Yeah, that's a lot of
It's a lot.
extra matter.
Yeah.
25%.
I think when you have a passion too, it's easier
Yeah.
to move. You also need to maintain a balance,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That's important. But you didn't know I have a computer in here.
Oh, no, I didn't.
Yeah.
It's the AI, Dr. Mike GPT, yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating. I think what it tells me at least is that we should no longer be just consumers of tools alone. We should take it and we should amplify it, right? To create and to lean into more curiosity, if anything. Just to make full use of, and over lunch, the ladies were talking about how they've been integrating different things into their practice based on what they know, so that it is no longer just monodimensional. So with multi-dimensional approaches, it tends to be a little bit more eclectic, yes, but it feels more complete almost. And I think MEMI has that opportunity to blend in with many other modalities or interventions, and I think that's the beauty of it. It's almost, I don't know, it's like every house needs an oven, that kind of thing.
I always think of requisite variety as well. Microsoft is so popular because you can find a solution to a problem 12 different ways. I always had that in mind when I was developing MEMI. So we can come at it this way, or we can come at it that way.
Right.
If they can't visualize, somebody has aphantasia and there's no picture. You can't put a picture up there. So what's the next most egregious problem that they have in terms of a sensory system? Oh, they got this terrible visceral sensation here. Let's use that. Or one guy with aphantasia I worked with could not visualize. And I said, well, how do you know it's a problem for you? And he said, the smoke. I said, oh, smoke. What happened? He said, I had a fire in the house. Smoke became the problem state. Right? And that's still because with requisite variety, you work on one part of the system, it resolves the rest of the system, or not, but maybe 2/3 of it is taken out, and then you go after the next third.
Yeah, I worked with a blind couple once, and all the other coaches were having problems with submodalities because they're primarily visual.
Yeah.
We winged it, take out your hands, and notice the relative difference in terms of how you feel if the picture is here versus if the picture is here. And they could get it. And it was like, oh, okay, it's not so, maybe the limitation is in the mind of the individual providing the coaching or the therapy. So most certainly, I think with requisite variety and a huge amount of systemic flexibility, we can most certainly get there. I think a lot of people tend to give up though, too quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess with MEMI, when they can see, oh wow, this actually works, then they can hunt for more things where it can work and continue to build beyond a more wholesome healing journey, as it were. One of the things that struck me was, and this was back in 2017, I had always identified myself as a trainer, as a speaker. But 2017, it dawned on me that my biggest skill set was healing, but that language doesn't hit well with corporations. As a leader, you need to sit down and listen and heal people's difficulties. And they're going to go, it's not as if I don't have enough jobs to do. You want to give me another job, become a psychotherapist? And then COVID hit. And then they learned the hard way. And what was interesting, I think, was that there was this image that came to me. No, it didn't come in a dream, but it was a very nice, they call it kintsugi in Japan. the vase or the plate breaks and you heal it with golden lacquer, you put it back together. And one of the things that I'd always struggled with was healing isn't always as fast as whatever modalities out there, whether it's hypnotherapy or whether it's NLP. Healing doesn't always take place quickly. So back then I was watching the X-Men, Wolverine and his healing factor, right? And I was going like, how can you heal quickly? Because I don't care how nice the plate looks, it's gonna break again. Remember the resilience piece you're talking about?
Yeah.
If it's gonna break again, if you could heal at the rate of breakage, you'll end up with a golden plate. And so that's something that I've leaned into. It's okay, yeah, bring it on. What are you afraid of? Let's just keep going. With additional modalities like MEMI, and of course with Joachim's brain switch, I think we are at the cusp of being able to create that kind of superhuman healing capability and pass it down to the masses because it's relatively simple to do. Yeah. So
I like that.
thank you. I suppose in wrapping up this, where do you see MEMI in 5 years?
In 5 years, okay, 5 years. I think that the programs we have are pretty solid. So I don't think we're going to do a lot of new program development, but we've got to scale up. We have to increase the number of people who are trained, and we have to get it marketed. It's really hard to break through because of the complex that I talked about earlier. But once people see a demonstration, they're sold. Once they see how it happens, or if they have the experience of it happening, then they're sold. So we've been doing quite a bit of free demonstrations around, and that has made a big difference. So in 5 years, I hope that we are probably 30 trainers strong. We have trainers being developed now in Italy and Poland. So we have Barry in the UK. I really would like to see South Asia explode too. Joachim has got plans, and we had Dr. Susie here from Malaysia, and doors may open there at one private university for us to do some trainings there. So yeah, I would like to see us maybe 30 trainers strong and be in a lot of countries. South America too. We have nothing going on in South America right now.
Oh, okay. Yeah, there's a huge potential there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Indonesia, I think with the way that AI is going and people going down that rabbit hole, personal well-being has never become more important as a focal point. Businesses are accelerating, and I think that kind of acceleration brings about its own kind of, I don't know what to call it, it's a kind of traumatic experience, work trauma. I think more than ever, people need something accessible. It's just a thing to hold on to. And yeah, I think that vision, if I see how the conference has gone, yeah, it's probably going to come true. And I'm pretty sure that these two will be at the forefront of that too.
They appear to be live wires going along the way. I love that.
All right. Dr. Mike, thank you so much for being on this podcast. Thank you for being forthright, open, and really being just a lovely soul, helping the people that you've helped and helping the helpers who help those other people as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.